If you find yourself feeling like the world is on your shoulders, you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and stressed out all the time, and that is turning into anger towards the loved ones that you come home to, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Uncommon Man podcast, where we help men eliminate and avoid burnout, increase their drive and energy, and eliminate the stress in their life. Today, we're diving into what happens and how to avoid the fact when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel stressed, when we feel anxious. How do we stop that converting into anger? Now, if you're anything like me or the boys here, I can probably speak for them as well. When life just feels like it fucking weighs a ton and you come home, you're exhausted from work, the last thing you need is more questions. And the simplest thing, because you've been making decisions all day long, you get home and a simple question, a loving question, in fact, something like, hey, babe, what do you want for dinner? Just sets you off. The kids want your time. Your wife wants your attention. The dog wants dinner. Everything is aiming to just be that last straw that breaks the camel's back. And suddenly you find yourself snapping towards your kids. All they want is time with dad, snapping towards your wife who's just trying to show you love. And let's be honest, snapping towards your dog, all that thing does is wag its tail and love you anyway. So how do you avoid this and why does it even happen? We're going to dive into that today to give you guys the tools and skills to eliminate first the overwhelm and the burnout, and second, if that is already happening to you now, how do you avoid it turning into the anger towards your loved ones? Now, Nick, mate, what have you experienced in your own personal life about how, I guess, not just work stress, but stress in general and that overwhelmed feeling in general turning into anger towards your loved ones?
It's really interesting. You know, I think when you're in those positions of, or in the position of overwhelm, and you find yourself in that place and the anxiety is building and there's this constant tension. And like you said earlier, just this weight that just doesn't want to dissipate. What I found in my life is I used to go very much inwards and I'd feel like I'd have to compartmentalize it. But as I started doing that, like the pressure would build inside of my system, and I didn't feel safe enough to express that, let's say, in my work or directly address whatever the pressure was, or in whatever other situation I was experiencing, and I would then redirect that anger and aggression, or that let's call it pressure initially, towards my loved ones. So my partner would take the brunt of that. She would maybe do something or say something or express something, and I would be so, deeply triggered by something so small and unrelated. And then I'd be like, that is a fantastic opportunity to go and express myself and to let go of this pressure, because you're the reason why I'm feeling this way. And that cycle repeated itself for I don't know how long. But essentially that was my mechanism of releasing that. And then also kids, you get frustrated because they're noisy. They're being kids. They're going to press buttons. They're going to ask questions. They're going to figure life out around you, and you're just going to have to make sense of it. And that would, result in the same thing. Like, why did you do that? And those would be the moments of release. And I found that the more anxious I got, the shorter that fuse was. So whenever there was an incident, I would be like, immediately I would react, versus it might take a little bit of time. So depending on how regulated and self-aware I was at the time, that would depend on how reactive and angry I would essentially be.
Does that kind of resonate with you, Harry?
Oh, 100%.
Do you have any kind of different take on it?
Like, as in, like, when I was feeling that frustration, that anger, or what caused it?
Yeah, what kind of caused it for you?
What I thought was causing it at the time, or in reflection, right? Because they're two different
Let's start
answers.
okay, perfect. Let's start what you think was causing it at the time, like the first initial response.
At the time, like, that frustration was because I felt like I didn't have enough time. I've got work to do. fucking leave me alone. Like, I don't want to have to decide what we're eating for dinner. Like, I don't want to have to do this shit. Fuck off. I'm trying to get this stuff done so that I can be the provider for the family, so I can do these things. Like, I'm doing this for you. Leave me alone so I can get this. And there's like, you project that frustration onto other people, right? So it was because I didn't have enough time to work, or because of this other excuse of, well, I can't do this when you're home because you're too noisy. I can't make content. I can't record this while I've got kids and like shit in the background. I can't do this because of XYZ. And then there's always because of this external factor that I was like projecting this to, and then that's where my anger and those emotions would be directed at.
Yeah. And I guess, what do we call that for our guys? Living at.
So I just want to add into that. So it could maybe come up in 3 different ways. So anger in itself, it can either be like this passive aggression, where you don't want to admit that you're angry, but it's like it's simmering underneath the surface. You've got your open aggression, where you're very direct and you can see it in your demeanor, and you're expressing that. Like, and also what I find with the passive aggression, it comes from a need to control and assert a sense of control in a situation. So you're trying to redirect whatever is happening in your external space. And then if you've got the hang of it, like let's say you're aware of it and you've done some introspection, you can actually assert the anger and use it as a tool.
Okay.
So it can come out in those 3 ways, just for reference.
Well, I'm naturally a nice guy, so we're passive aggressive creatures. So that mostly comes out for me.
Because okay. So this is good, because it kind of touches on 2 things. It's like living at cause or living at effect. That is the difference in that aspect of life there. And do you want to kind of just explain living at cause and effect a bit, Harry, for the guys listening, so they can understand it?
Sure. So when you're living as effect, like you're living as a result of everything happening to you, like everything, whether it's people, like situations in life, everything happens to you. Everything is against you, and you just get pushed through life, and everything happens to you. And you're the victim, basically, because it's everybody else's fault. It's never yours. You're never to blame, and it's always everybody else. But when we live as cause, we take ownership, we take responsibility for ourselves, our emotions, our actions, our situation in life, and then look at what part did I play in that, and then take action based on that recognition to then better your situation, better your position, so that you're actually owning the part that you can control in what you're upset about or the situation you're referring to.
And that, I guess, for the guys listening, that is one of the biggest and most powerful tools that you can understand. That is a tool, because as soon as you can understand that and put that in your life, you control all the controllables, which is where a lot of anxiety comes from. There are some things we can't control in our life, and that's fine. We should know what those things are. But when it comes to controlling the controllables, cause and effect is really, really important. We've touched on a few things, but I want to give the guys an awareness of, like, what are the early signs that your anxiety is about to turn into anger?
For me, it's when I would get triggered or react emotionally over trivial things, right? Like I would go from 0 to 100, like fucking that, right? Like all of a sudden you'd be chill. You'd be like, like with my son, with Jax, it's all right, buddy. It's okay. He's crying. And then he doesn't stop after a few seconds. And it's like, dude, why won't you shut the fuck up? Right? You just go like ham. Or when, the missus asks you, as you said, one of those loving questions, and it's just, I'm fine, to just full rage mode, like out of nowhere. Cool. There's something simmering in there that you haven't like acknowledged. Probably do something about that. So feeling those things coming on of that 0 to 100 is a sign for me that there's stuff I need to look at.
That's a key one. Nick, what about you?
I think you answered that really well. On my side, I would notice that I wouldn't feel like myself. So I'd feel I suppose like the physical symptoms of I'm tired. I feel tense. I don't feel like doing things that I'd normally want to do. And that's been building gradually. And then maybe I would notice that there were changes in my patterns of behavior. So I went to bed a little bit later and later and later. I'm drinking more coffee. I'm not doing the things that I normally commit to, which I believe are important to, making sure that I show up as the best version of me. So I'd say there was even a self-sabotaging / procrastination, underlying procrastination, and then everything builds. Then the anxiety comes up, and then just like Harry, then you have those moments. And it's like either passive aggression, you're snappy, or you're like in there, full-blown rage mode. Fuck this, fuck that. I'm frustrated. Life is shit. The weather made me feel this way today. Fuck the dog. It's just fuck spiders, whatever the Australians are getting to. Sorry, Harry. I'm just saying. It's then that then comes out, and then you're just like, fuck, where did that actually come from? Like, what was it? But it's been building. It might not even be a day. It's like a week or 2 or 3. It could even be a month. That this is like built up and pent up, and then it just gets expressed, and everyone else has to suffer because of that.
Yeah.
I'll even add to that. One of the things that used to be one of my very early signs, which I used to think this was like my way of solving the problem of like, well, I don't have enough time, right? So I can't create more time, but I can sleep less with the power of coffee. So I'm going to get up at 3:34 in the morning, basically double or triple my caffeine intake, and just work more. And then, so not only does that increase in caffeine and stimulants, but also decrease my sleep, add to that anxiety, and that, I guess, lowers the threshold to stress, lowers the threshold to that discipline, to that mental control, and all those kind of things. So my fuse becomes shorter, and I get to that 100 a hell of a lot faster because of all those things prior.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, I guess, one of the factors, a couple of the factors that then lead that fuse to being the size of an absolute bee dick.
I've got about 3 or 4 telltale signs. One is like I get real huffy. I'm like,
Just real dramatic.
just real. Fleur's like, man, you're breathing real heavily at the moment. I'm like, she's like, are you all right? I'm like, yeah. And I'm just like, what's going on? And then there's an avoidance mechanism. So I'll either be like, oh, should we just watch a movie, or I'll be on my phone more. And there's simple things like that. And I feel really rushed, like there is a lot on. Oh my God, I got so much stuff on. I just have so much stuff on. And then when I break it down, put it into a list, I'm like, I could probably do that in the next hour. That's not going to be a big deal. And that's one of my tools, by the way. That is like my go-to. I'm like, if I'm stressed out, I just shut the door in my office. I go inside. I take my list. I just write it down. I'm like, okay, cool. Does that fit in your calendar this week? No. What about the next 2 weeks? Yes. Put it in. Beautiful. That is beautiful. And then the final one is this thing that I say. I just feel like I need to go bush for a bit. Like just go camping, or just get out of here and just sit in the bush. And that's one of the
another form of avoidance.
That's exactly. That's all it is. It's just another form of avoidance for me. And I'm like, man. And then, jeepers, there's 5 actually, because the last one is alcohol. I'll literally be like, yeah, I think it's time for a whiskey. It'll be like, it's 4:00 on Monday. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's not a great time for a whiskey. It certainly feels that way. And those are those things that I know that I'm anxious, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And if I don't do something about it, it turns into anger every time. But it's funny because obviously you live with your partner long enough. I think it's nearly 13 years now. So it's like, hey, that thing's happening. I'm like,
cut that out. Get out of here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't want to do that. Cool. And I guess we've kind of touched on it a bit, but I want to go deeper into the idea of like, why does anxiety or that overwhelm, why does it actually turn into anger? What is the connection between the two, Nick?
So, like I mentioned earlier, it's in this case specifically, personally, I see it as a way to control your environment. And by obviously you asserting yourself and becoming more dominant in some way, shape, or form, you're able to take control. It's this narrative that you can shift. But essentially, it's actually a fight response. So your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, this is a fight response that you would normally, step into. And this comes across when you're feeling endangered or threatened by, a situation or a loved one, or you're sitting in a position where, you've had all these intrusive thoughts and now you believe them. And now you're feeding these thoughts, these little clouds or whispers or ideas. And now this has to be true. And then that creates a story. And that story is going to elicit an emotional response. And so you are in a fight response. And then if we dive a little bit deeper into that, essentially you are dysregulated from a nervous system standpoint. You're not grounded. You're not regulated. So everything is heightened. Cortisol's up. And you're ready to go and, fight. And that builds up over time and you haven't been able to bring yourself down. So everything is going to be feeding this response over a period of time. And because even, let's say, if you are someone that is normally a person who, flees a situation or freezes or fawns because of the trauma or your upbringing or whatever the case may be, if you look at the two different types of anger that's expressed, it might be very passive. And because normally you'll only express that anger in the spaces that you feel safest, and that's normally the people that are closest to you that are going to, feel the brunt of that, you'll be willing to express that. And that's how you might bypass a normal response of how you normally react.
That's really interesting because I look at how, I'm by no means perfect, and these things still happen in my life where I blow up a little bit and regret it dreadfully. But I look at those times when I'm overwhelmed and that anxiety is building. There's this map or model that I play out in my head that I've got so much on, so therefore more of my time's in work, less of my time's with Fleur and the family, which then I feel like I'm letting her down and not doing enough. And then that anxiety builds. Fleur will say one small thing like, how come you didn't do the washing? Or how come you said you were going to get that done? And quickly, all of that anxiety and overwhelm flips straight through the transfer of resentment into anger. And it's very, very fast. And that's that whole thing that Harry said before. Well, I'm fucking doing this for you. And it's this, it used to be fast and I wasn't aware of it, but that's how the anger exploded. And that was that nice guy. I was a savage. I was 6 months, just pile it up, suddenly get overwhelmed. The straw broke the camel's back and I would flip the switch. And that was that I wanted to take back control. And the anger I felt gave me control. It didn't. It was just the idea I had in my head. And that was there's still a little bit of shame around that in the past for sure. Like those pieces of the puzzle that are still there. You're like, man, you lost your shit bad.
Yeah.
Bad. So that's interesting. Harry, what have you done in your own life and with your clients to bring awareness to why that anger or how that anger is coming up from anxiety for them?
We already touched on it, like that cause and effect piece. So that whole projection of like, I'm pushing this out onto other people that especially don't deserve it. Like we know when you look at some of those things that we blow up about, they're trivial things. Like I don't think anyone would say that warranted that response. Like no one would, right? So when you can look at that and be like, okay, well, there's something deeper. There's something else that's going on. It's either if it's in that relationship, maybe there's a bunch of other stuff you haven't addressed, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's shit that's there. Or if there's this common theme of you getting triggered, getting angry, getting overwhelmed at other things across the board, whether it's the kid, the dog, the partner, friends, like other situations in life, then you're the common theme there. What is it like when you look back at yourself that maybe you're not feeling in control with, that you're not doing, that you're frustrated or that you're angry with yourself about, that is being then projected onto other people? because we'd like to find an easy way out or push it onto someone else instead of taking responsibility for ourselves.
That piece right there, you talked about channeling. Nick talked about channeling anger. It can be a useful tool. But whenever there's tension in our life, we search to resolve it. And some of us resolve it in anger. I've resolved it in retreating. There is a way that we try and resolve it rather than alchemizing it. And I want to talk to a couple of things. I want to share strategies with these guys for before you're angry, like how do you deal with this? What strategies do you use? And now that if you're already angry and you're in that place, and I want to have an understanding of how do guys actually alchemize that energy into something that's going to be positive. What have you shared with your clients, Nick, that have been helpful strategies?
So one of the things that I bring up is how we are thinking about the situation. So you're pissed off essentially because of how you're thinking about the situation or the object, person. And when you step a little bit back out of your ego and out of your experience, and you just look at it and you're like, did the weather really fuck up my day? How did the weather do that? Just out of curiosity, how did the weather do that? It's rainy. I wanted to go outside and go for a walk, go to the beach. Did the weather really fuck up my day? No, but my thinking about the weather fucking up my day did. And it's when you can kind of start, like, I always see it when someone is like really stuck in their thought process. It's like you've got all these hooks that validate this narrative. And when you can start unhooking those hooks from yourself and be like, oh, it actually wasn't that. It was just how I was looking at it. So what if I stand here and just start observing this experience and asking myself different questions about it, getting really curious. So the first bit of medicine that I share is, well, perspective and curiosity. Because you can't be pissed off and curious at the same time.
No, that's true.
You genuinely can't. So you sit there and you actually ask yourself questions about this. And maybe you don't get to the root, but even if you can at least quell the thoughts and the way you're thinking about that, you will bring the intensity down. Because I think one of the other components we haven't necessarily brought up is some people have a predisposition for just, being typically like anxious, and they might, be more on the side of the spectrum just through how they design that they have more angst and they are a little bit more sensitive. That's okay. But being aware that you have a certain predisposition for that, it just gives you an opportunity to say, well, this is what my normal feels like. I know I'm projecting. I'm seeing this from a space that isn't necessarily supporting my highest good, supporting what I'm wanting to achieve in this moment, or supporting the household that I'm in. And that I know sounds all great, but it really does start with curiosity. That's where you start. Where am I sitting, viewing this from? And then getting curious about, well, what else is available to me in this moment?
I've used two things to shake my clients in these situations. The first one is trying to find an example where suddenly like things weren't going well, everything was turning to shit, and they just felt anxious, overwhelmed, or angry, to then suddenly something just switched and you were fucking all happy and Larry and life is great. Usually someone can find that scenario, and I use that scenario to be like, cool, so how true are feelings and thoughts? Because how can you be one thing in one moment and completely the opposite in the next? So how true are feelings and thoughts? There's no truth to them whatsoever. There is zero truth to feelings and thoughts. We love to validate them, but at the end of the day, they're not real. And I'm like, that gives them a bit of a shudder, because they're like, well, that's a good point, because 1 minute I was completely and utterly angry, and the next minute I'm joyful and happy. So what is it? Yes, they lead to things. They give us clues. They're really, really helpful things for awareness. But I use that rattle tool. And then the other thing that I've found to be helpful is we get angry. We fuck up our relationships. and this goes for parents and for couples, because this is actually really helpful. You need to fuck up. And the reason why is because if you're good at it, when you fuck up, the forgiveness has to go on self first. Like, okay, I fucked up. I'm not perfect. And then you have one of the greatest opportunities, and that is the repair. Because a relationship, it's like the Japanese bowl where they repair the bowl with gold, and it's even more beautiful and more valuable now that it's been broken and repaired. Same goes for relationships. You blow up at your kid, you blow up at your wife, you take ownership. You're like, man, that was really poor behavior. I forgive myself. And then you go to them. There's one really, really important piece of the puzzle. If I blow up at Harry and I call him a complete cock and I hate the guy, and then I go, oh, that was all me, I was angry, and then I go to apologize to Harry, the key point is, Harry, I apologize for behavior that just wasn't right. People ruin it with this word. But Harry, if you just didn't do this, that
if you weren't such a cock, I wouldn't have to.
Exactly. And that goes back to that cause and effect. But I'm like, for those guys who aren't angry, who have had those situations, you have a real great opportunity to repair and make a relationship more valuable, more powerful. You just can't use that word, but you got to take full responsibility. And I've found that to be really helpful. Harry, what about you, man?
For those tools, man, you really helped me with this when Jax was first born, and I was really struggling with this, with like this anger and this frustration and everything else that was coming with like the uncharted territory of being a dad trying to juggle everything else. And it was in that self-reflection of like, first of all, in self-reflection, because in the moment it's too hard to kind of use this tool, but in that self-reflection, was that emotion the right tool for the job? Was that anger the right tool for that job to get Jax to stop crying, to, communicate effectively with my wife, to achieve this thing? And chances are probably not, right? And then so being able to then at least identify, well, what is the desired tool? What is the desired response or emotion that I would like to have in those situations? So at least I've got an ideal path moving forward, not just, well, I don't want to be angry. Cool, that's not helpful. How would I like to handle those situations when I do feel that pent up tension, that frustration, like when I feel that boiling? How would I like to control myself in that situation? And so one of the tools that I like to use, like also tying in your piece, Nick, about like that perspective, is something I call like the Kaleidoscope Frame. Right? Everyone remember those kaleidoscopes you have as a kid? It's got this like little, like this telescope looking thing with all the jewels in it. And you just look at this light source and you turn it, and there's like all the different colored patterns. You're like, that's sick. Then you turn it again. There's more colors, all that cool stuff. And so the way that I like use that frame is the light source, the thing, the event, the person, the whatever it is that you're looking at is still the same. But it's the perspective, the lens that you look at through that changes. And so like if you're looking at this thing through, well, looking at this event or this situation through this lens that evokes that anger is not serving me. How else could I look at this that helps me to feel calm? Well, my son isn't doing it to piss me off. He's not crying because he wants to make me angry. He's probably crying because he doesn't know how to communicate and he can't talk yet. That's a fair reason to be upset or to try and communicate something, right? Yeah. And then so you keep going until you find that lens of, well, okay, seeing it from that perspective allows me to be calm, allows me to have more compassion, more patience, more tolerance, more whatever it is that I'd like to evoke. All right, cool. Let's try and see things from that perspective a little bit more. And then so you keep playing with all those different views until you find the one that serves you best. Right? Partly delusion, but it's effective.
Mate, at the end of the day, you manipulate your mind for the best result that you want. It's perfect. That's all it is.
If it helps you get the outcome you want and take the action or non-action that you were hoping to, then it's done its job.
That's great. I love that. Nick, have you got anything to add, brother?
I think if you're really wanting to fix it, it's one of the things we've touched on before, but it's essentially establishing the identity of this person that you know yourself to be, getting clear on those values. And if you know that person or persona, and that's what you're striving for, one of the questions that you can ask, and it's not just applicable to this, it'll be applicable to other practices and just behavior in general, is does this action fit with this identity or this person that I'm choosing to be?
Yeah.
Does this response fit with this person that I'm choosing to be, this father that I'm choosing to be, the husband that I'm choosing to be, the business owner that I'm choosing to be?
Awesome. And the last thing, if you have ever wanted to be surrounded by an uncommon bunch of men, we have some incredible events coming up. We have one on the 5th and 6th of October. We'll drop the link to that as well in the description, and Project Bali next year in May. If you want to be part of one of those events, you can join the waitlist with the link in the description. Look forward to seeing you there. Well, guys, again, thank you so much for your time today. If you guys listening would like the unfair advantage that we use with our guys called the pyramid of performance to help them regulate their nervous system, which is the foundational structure we use for guys to achieve amazing things in their health, in their wealth, in their relationships, avoiding burnout or eliminating it entirely, you can come over to our group on Facebook, completely free. All the resources are there. We're in there all the time. We're helping out our guys as much as we can. There's lives, there's questions. You can direct message us as well. We're in there. The link will be in the description. Hope to see you there. Reach out. Tell us what you loved about the podcast, and look forward to connecting soon. Thank you very much for listening.